Hello everyone, it is Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore, and welcome to the MuseScore Café. So I want to thank everyone for being here. If you're new to the stream, welcome. If you're not new, welcome as well. This is my regular series I do on Wednesdays, where we talk about some aspect of making music using MuseScore. So first of all, I am feeling better than last week. I'm not 100%. My voice is still not there. My cough is actually, but other things are feeling better. But anyhow, we're going to be talking about creating educational worksheets today. That's kind of the topic. It's come up a bunch of times, in part because we've got so many people going through the MuseScore course, and you're seeing the worksheets that I've created, and a lot of questions are coming up about how to create these. So I'm going to be showing you that. And it's not, I use these a lot in teaching. It comes up often for me in that context. But it's not just for educational purposes. There's really any number of reasons where you might want to do some of these things where you're combining some amount of text with some amount of music notation to show examples of things. So, oh, great that you can stay, Colleen. So there's different reasons why you might want to do some of the things that I'm showing you here. And really a lot of the technique you'll find apply like anything having to do with text. If you're working on, say, an opera or a musical, you'll find you'll want to use blocks of text for the dialogue or so forth. That goes above and beyond normal use of text for lyrics. And you'll also see some of the things that I'm doing that might be useful. Like, okay, I'm just going to flip and show you some things. Here is one of the worksheets that I created for the course. And as you can see, this is like mostly text. You don't actually see a note of music anywhere on that page. And this, I'm not suggesting you try to use MuseScore as a word processor, but there's some cool things that happen if you try to do this. And I want to show you how you can create large amounts of text and format things and get graphics in there, because you'll find them useful for other things. Let me flip over and show you another one of my worksheets here. This one here does something that you might find useful, where you have like a break in the middle of a system like this, right? And this is mostly for educational purposes. You might want to put multiple examples on a page, but there's any other reasons where you might want to do things like that, right? And as another example, let's keep hunting for the example that I'm looking for. Here we go. This guy here. What we have here is a scale, and as you see, there's no time signature there. We've got just 7 notes in this scale, and there's not a time signature. So this idea that you might want to notate non-metered music, this comes up often in putting together worksheets, because the worksheets will let me make sure I'm actually not missing things in the chat here, just because. Here we go. Good. Every time I update my OS, I lose my ability to pin the chat, and so I didn't realize that until too late. I can reestablish it, but I'll have to reboot to do it. So next time. All right. So anyhow, the examples that I was talking about here, this guy in particular, you'll see that it is showing basically non-metered music. You're getting to see music that doesn't have an explicit meter, and I can also show you about like hiding the stems and things like that. So anyhow, all the techniques that I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to be showing them in the context of putting together these worksheets. But I will show you, the techniques will be useful in other contexts as well. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to create a new score. And when I create my new score here, I actually have a template that I've created for handouts, but it's not very useful. So if I go to where it says My Templates, you'll see I have a handout template. The handout template looks fancy in the preview here, but there's nothing to it. I'm going to go ahead and use it, and then we'll talk about what this template actually does. But this template really does almost nothing. This template has almost all just default settings, but it does have a few things in it that are useful, and so I can share this later. Someone might have to remind me to attach it when I post the post the replay. Someone might need to remind me about that. So again, let me get this version here to be where we can see the chat. So the question from Francois is, why is there W and H? I assume this is about the scales, and these are half steps and whole steps. This is me demonstrating where the half steps and whole steps are in the scale. And this text that I've inserted here is, we can see if I select one of these pieces of text and go down to the status bar, you can see they are lyrics. Now, normally the lyrics would be positioned directly under the notes, but I have adjusted their position. If I go to the properties panel with that lyric selected and then click on appearance, you'll see there is a horizontal offset attached. So this W is actually attached to the F sharp, and but it has a negative 2.5 spaces offset. So it's displaying to the left of the F sharp. The reason, by the way, I attach it to the F sharp instead of the E is if you think about this logically, if you're going through this in order, we haven't had a step yet. When we play the E, we haven't had a step. F sharp is the note that represents the whole step above the E. So I attach the W to the F sharp because logically that is what it applies to. It applies to the distance between the two notes, literally. But if we've got to apply it to one note or the other, I'm going to apply it to the second note. And this is one of the many things that I do so that if a blind musician is going through this handout using a screen reader, the whole step will read when they hear the note itself, rather than having to, guess what note is coming. So this idea that I make a lot of concessions, a lot of things that I do in creating these handouts in ways to make them more accessible to blind musicians. You're going to hear me mentioning this periodically, and they're usually not big deals. They're small things like that, deciding which of the two notes I'm going to attach this text to. But it does matter. And so usually you could do it either way, but by doing it one way, it makes it a little more accessible. I'm going to make that choice. So so thanks for bringing that up, and I'm going to try to remember to keep pointing that out. So let's talk about this handout. I'm going to start creating this handout or something very much like it, and we'll talk about what's involved. One of the things you can see is I've got these blocks of text, and then I have music, right? So the block of text here, as you probably have realized, MuseScore is not a word processor. It doesn't have things like word wrap. If you want to type a whole paragraph of text into MuseScore, you're going to be a bit disappointed because, yeah, it's just going to run off the end of the page. If I come over to my score here, I'm going to go ahead and add a block of text so you can see how that happens. I'll select the first measure and then say add frames, insert text frame. And notice, by the way, I have defined a keyboard shortcut for that. Because I do a lot of this sort of thing, I don't want to have to go to the menu every time, and there's not a keyboard shortcut defined by default, so I defined one myself. And you're going to you hear me talk about this pretty often, but I'm going to do it probably a little more than average in this session, have custom shortcuts, because I'm going to be using commands that don't apply in a lot of music, and so they don't have default shortcuts. So I'm going to be doing things like inserting text frames often. So what this is telling me is Control-Alt-Shift-T is what I have defined. So I'll go ahead and add it from the menu right now, and now I've got my text frame. And now I can double-click it and start typing some text. And I can type my text, and I type really fast if it doesn't have to make any sense. And as you see, it just goes right off the edge of the page. That is what I mean by no word wrap, right? By the way, if you've never seen defining custom shortcuts before, you go to Edit, Preferences, and then Shortcuts. And then there'll be a search box here, and you can type in frame, and you'll see the various commands: add frame text, append horizontal frame, go to previous frame, various different various different commands for which you can define a shortcut. And so this is the insert text frame command that I've defined a shortcut, Control-Alt-T. And the way you do that is you select the command and then click define. And now you can just type your desired command, Control, Alt, Shift, T. And then hit save to save that. If that shortcut is already being used, MuseScore will let you know. So I've got that text in there, and of course it's running right off the edge of the page because word wrap isn't the thing. So now here is a personal choice that I have made when I put together these handouts. Yes, I could painstakingly go through this and figure out, oh, this is the last word that fit on the line, so I'm going to put in a break there. Right? So you could go through your text and insert the line breaks yourself to make it look like what word wrap would have done. But then as soon as you start editing this text, say, oh, I don't want that word there, I want this shorter word here. Suddenly your line break is in the wrong place, right? So you've probably all encountered that sort of thing. If you try to fake word wrap with line breaks, it's kind of a pain in the butt because editing, your line breaks end up being off if you make any changes. I edit all the time. I didn't want to deal with that. I did not want to deal with that as an issue. So I want to tell you philosophically what decision I made. And I'm going to do it by referring to this handout here because it has a little more text in it. I made the decision in putting all of my handouts together. This goes across all my courses, all the handouts that I've created. Instead of paragraphs, I use bullet points. That way, I don't have to deal with word wrap. I make sure my bullet point is concise enough that I can state it in a single line of text. If it is such a long concept that it requires more than one line of text, that's not a bullet point, that's a paragraph. And so I have to rethink what I'm trying to say. And to me, this is like a making lemonade situation, right? Life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. Yeah, word wrap would be great. Any number of situations we would all love to have word wrap. Someday, I'm sure that'll happen. But for now, given that we do not have word wrap, and I'm trying to put these educational things together, okay, if I can't have word wrap, I'm going to have to put in line breaks. Well, let me use that as an opportunity to clarify my thoughts so that instead of writing some big, long, run-on sentence like the way I talk, let me clarify my thoughts by breaking things down into individual bullet points. If I can do that, I've helped myself because now I don't have to deal with the whole word wrap issue, but I also help the reader because now you don't have to read some rambling paragraph. You just read the highlights. If you think about a textbook, if you all remember being in college or high school or whatever and having yellow highlighters like I'm using here, and I'm going to show you that, and you might go through your textbook and highlight the important sentences with the yellow highlighter. The way I think of it is the sentences that I put into my handouts, those are the yellow highlighted sentences. Those are the sentences that if I had written a big long textbook, those are the sentences that would have been highlighted anyhow. So I've made the conscious choice to just put those in there. Now, if you want to then, put in your own line breaks to have paragraphs, by all means, you can do it, but you're going to have to do it manually. So for me, when I'm doing these line breaks, I just put in a dash and then a space and then type my bullet point. Dash, space, type my bullet point, hit enter, dash, space, type my bullet point. And yes, these are nonsense bullet points, but you get the idea. Notice that as I'm typing, MuseScore does expand the height of that text frame to accommodate the text. That's one of the things that MuseScore does for you. It expands the size of that frame. Now, by the way, notice we don't actually see the frame right now. That's one of the things that my template had set up for me. It makes the frames themselves invisible. I don't, this isn't very useful to me while I'm editing. So I'm actually going to go over to the view menu and say show frames. And now the frames will show so that they appear while I'm editing, because it is useful to me while I'm editing to be able to see those frames. Okay, so you can do that in the view menu. In MuseScore 4, which is of course what I'm using here, you can also go to the properties panel. And if you have nothing selected, this is where you can control here that shows that frames are showing. You can also make invisible elements show or not show. Formatting, like the line breaks and so forth within the music, you can make those show or not show. You can have the margins show or not show. That's all here in the Properties panel if nothing is selected. When something is selected, the Properties panel is going to show the properties of that element. But with nothing selected, it shows you these handful of kind of useful settings. So when I mentioned that the template sets up a couple of things that are maybe a little bit useful, maybe not, that was one of them. It by default had the display of the invisible elements, the formatting, and the frames turned off. And by the way, to create a template, it's real simple. When you have a score, just save it. And when you save it, you go to File, Save, and maybe use Save As so you don't change your original copy. And instead of saving to your Scores folder, go up a level and go to your Templates folder. And this is where you can see I saved that handout. And so anything you save here in your Templates folder becomes available to you when you go to create a new score. And then it will inherit the settings of the score used as a template. So this is how I do my text. I do these bullet points like that. And then you may notice that I also indent some of my bullet points. And frankly, I always forget how many spaces I use, and I'll have to open an older handout to remember. But I think I've been using 4 spaces as my indent. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I use 4 spaces as an indent. And that's because MuseScore, again, not a word processor, doesn't have fancy tab stops and things like that you can set. You're just going to use some number of spaces. By the way, I use the hyphen as my bullet point character for one really not great reason, but again, it has to do with accessibility. The screen reader that I was testing these on would ignore the hyphens the way I wanted it to ignore them. In other words, it would read, it would pause at the end of the sentence here. I put periods at the end of my bullet points. I don't capitalize them just because I'm lazy, I guess, but I do put periods after my bullet points to make sure a screen reader pauses so that you can understand a screen reader will pause so you can understand that's the end of one, and then the next bullet point begins. I use a hyphen rather than an actual bullet point or asterisk because the screen reader that I was using to test with would ignore the hyphen. It wouldn't read bullet. And I always thought that was a little annoying to hear it read bullet or asterisk or whatever. But I am going to show you how to add actual bullet points if that's going to work better for you. I'll show you that in a minute. Yeah, this is how I have my indents work. So 4 spaces. So if I wanted to have something indented here, I go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then type my next series of bullet points, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, I can type really fast if it doesn't have to make sense. All right. Before I go any further, I want to talk about one other formatting related thing that I do here. The amount of space between my title frame and the text frame here is more than I need. If you look at my other ones that are done here, you'll see there's less space between those frames. The amount of space that appears between frames is a style setting, and the default, well, you can see I have a frame selected right now. If I come over to properties, you'll see gap above and gap below, and they're both set to 7. So, and the same is true of the title frame. When I select the title frame, you'll see gap above 7, gap below 7. So there's 7 spaces, like literally staff space sizes, of space below that title frame, and then another 7 above the next text frame. And then there's 7 spaces below this text frame. Well, that's too much because now we've got the 7 spaces below this and the 7 spaces above this. So what I usually do is take my first text frame and set its gap above to 0. And then it moves in closer to the title. You could also select the title and set the gap below to 0. That would work exactly the same way. So that's how you can control the amount of space between your frames. And also, I will often use that to control the amount of space below this frame. So for instance, if I have, say, notes here, I have my scale here, and then I want to put some text above here. I'll use Control T for staff text, and this is a description. And then maybe I also have a rehearsal mark. I'll use Control M, and this gives me text in boxes. Well, now suddenly this text box, this text frame looks too close to the staff. So the way I'm going to fix that is select that frame and increase that gap below. So I'll typically use 10 staff spaces below frames if there's a bunch of stuff above the staff like there is here. If not, though, that default of 7 actually works pretty well. But many of my handouts, like let's take a look at some of my handouts. This one here has chord symbols above. And if I select my frame here and go to properties, yeah, you'll see that in this case, 7 was fine because with only chord symbols, that was good enough. I thought that was enough space. And of course, I'm trying to save space usually to make sure the handouts fit on just 1 or 2 pages. So I'm not adding more space than I think is actually necessary. But yeah, if there's a lot of text above the staff here, I've got this box text there. So that is a rehearsal mark. And if I select this frame, you'll see I've set the gap below to 8. If I have both a rehearsal mark and other text, that's when I'll go up to 10 or more, right? So it all depends, you know, on what you're trying to stay out of the way of. All right, well, let's talk now about, since I did just actually show you text and I showed you a rehearsal mark, let's talk about this, this meterless thing. We talked about this a bit in a previous session, and the idea that, you know, might create meterless music. Here I've got 2 measures that this is a scale, and I want that to be really the whole system. So let me flip back over to the major scale handout. One of the things you can see here, volume seems low today. Is anyone else finding that? I wasn't noticing any difference, but let me check. Well, let me hear from other people. Let's hear from other people if that's the case. I did do a test earlier and everything seemed normal to me, but I'll let other people comment, and if so, I can see if I can adjust. Volume good. Yeah, I think it's fine. So one of the things you might notice here is that these scales here don't go all the way to the right edge, right? Because this isn't like a full line of music. It's really just one measure, and it's kind of, I left a lot of space so I could get those W's and H's in there without looking confusing, but I didn't want to stretch it all the way to the right edge of the page. So what's going on here, you don't see it because, again, I've turned off the display of frames. But if I turn on the display of frames here, what you'll see is there are horizontal frames. There are horizontal frames there that at the end of each system. So we're going to add a horizontal frame so that after my scale, and then I will put in a break. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here. The way I'm going to insert that frame is I'm going to select the measure after it, and then I can go to the Add menu. And you can also use this plus button on the toolbar and say Insert Horizontal Frame. You'll see I have a shortcut for that also, Control, Alt, Shift, H, right? So now I have my horizontal frame. Now I can select that frame and hit Enter to add a line break. And when you do this, now I've got my, notice the break, or system break, I should call it more technically. The break is on the frame itself. That's what I'm going to want because I want that frame to be on that same system. Now that frame isn't wide enough, so I can go to the properties panel and just, you know, increase that width until it looks about the way I want it. And, you know, I'm a sucker for round numbers. I don't know why. It's just a thing. So I'll bet that I probably used a value like 25. Let's select this thing and take a look at properties. Yeah, 25, right? I'm not going to guesstimate it and call it 21.3 or whatever, dragging it. I just use round numbers because I'm silly. I like them. But it does mean that then I was able to use the exact same setting here, 25 staff spaces for this frame, and so that all these measures are essentially the same width. So that precision, the precision is is a good thing. You know, I'm not apologizing for liking precision, but you can be precise by always using 21.3 also. It's just my silliness of always using nice round numbers like 25. Okay, so I've got this set up the way I want, but while I'm talking about breaks, let me enter another scale here. Good enough. And I'm going to play this example. So notice that the music volume was quiet because I had turned it down while it was playing the music, the cafe theme music. And so maybe that's what you're thinking, is that while I was entering the notes, it was very quiet. Also, I'm using MuseSound's Choir in this particular handout here, and it's relatively quiet also. So that is absolutely the case. You are definitely hearing quietness, but now it sounds more normal. Actually, that's not MuseSound's Choir. That's just MuseScore Basic. And I deliberately did that because I knew MuseSound's Choir was too quiet. It's just because I had my volume turned down. So anyhow, it just played one scale and then went running right on to the next. So instead of using system breaks, I always use section breaks. So instead of adding that system break there, I can go to the layout palette and add the section break here. And I've also defined a shortcut for that. I've made that Control-Alt-Enter because I use section breaks often when I'm creating a handout. I mean, normally section breaks are for things like between movements. So an entire symphony of, say, 4 movements, you know, that's an hour of music possibly, and you might only have you'd only have 3 section breaks in that entire hour-long score. Section breaks aren't something you add often normally, but if you're creating a handout, you might create a dozen of them in a single handout. Headphones. Oh, okay, that makes sense. One of the many things that the section break does for you is now, if I play this, there's a pause. And this idea that we might want to play these examples and have them play, you know, and sound like separate examples is really useful when you're creating handouts like this or anything involving separate excerpts. So I'm in the habit of always using section breaks when, you know, I'm between my examples like this, so that there is that pause there. The other thing it does for me is if my next piece needed to be, if I wanted to have a key signature, if I wanted to put a D key signature there, I can get my D key signature on this, and notice now no courtesy key signature appears on the previous system. That's another thing the section break does for you. In normal music, courtesy key signatures are needed, right? So if I get rid of that, if I change that back into a regular line break, hey, look, no courtesy appeared. I think if I actually delete it and then re-add it, though, I'll bet it will. No? That's curious. I'm not going to worry about it. But normally courtesy key signatures appear, and it's the section break that prevents that from happening. So section breaks are great to use between examples. So I've got my example here, and it's basically a scale, and I can see it's a scale, but I wanted to show you how to make it not show a time signature and not show that bar line or anything. So what I'm going to do is select the 2 measures here, and I want to join them together into a single measure. So I will go to Tools, Measures, Join Selected Measures. And here's another case where I do this a lot when I'm creating handouts. So I've created, and not just handouts, also if I'm creating Renaissance music or, you know, writing in that style or transcribing Renaissance music, I use the technique a lot to create these kind of meterless measures. So I've got a shortcut I defined for it, Control-Alt-Shift-J. So with those 2 measures selected, I do that command, and now it's one big measure. And then if I know there's going to be no time signatures in the entire piece here, I could go ahead and right-click this and go to Staff Part Properties and turn off time signatures. But I don't necessarily want to do that because, you know, my handout might have some passages of music that are meterless like that, but other passages where I want to show like a piece of real music. So I typically don't turn off time signatures entirely, I just select them individually and press V to make them invisible. And so it's grayed out there on the screen, but it's invisible. Now, if I had wanted to make those notes be stemless also, I would select those, go to Properties, and then under the Note Head section here, what am I doing? No, it's not under Note Head. Sorry, it is under Stem. I want to say stemless. And now they're stemless, right? So that's how you can make your note heads be stemless if, again, you're just trying to show something about pitch and are not trying to show anything about rhythm, or if you're trying to show rhythm in sort of a medieval type of context where they weren't using modern notation for note durations, but just using solid and hollow note heads to indicate long and short. So, yeah, that's something I do quite a lot of, this joining of measures, hiding of time signatures, adding section breaks, and so forth. There's more I can show you here. Let's take a look at this example. And this example is probably from before I discovered this. I'm going to go ahead and hit escape a bunch of times to make sure nothing is selected. Come over to the Properties panel and turn on invisible elements, turn on frames, turn on formatting so I can turn on. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I want to make sure everything's visible here. If I go to play this example right now, let me go ahead and play it. So what happened is it played those two examples back to back, then it paused because of the section break. It didn't pause between the examples. So if I think that that's going to be important, what I'm now getting in the habit of doing is adding a pause. So I'll go over to the palettes and open up the, in this workspace, this is the default workspace. So this is showing you more or less what you are seeing on your systems as well. But I've defined my own workspace. So if I click the workspace button here, and I just uploaded yesterday the workspaces lesson to the course. So if you want to learn more about workspaces, you can watch the lesson I just uploaded to the course yesterday. It's like one of the very last lessons in the whole course. But you can see what I did. I clicked the workspace button down here. In MuseScore 3, it's to the top right. It'll open up a dialog. There'll be a button to create a new workspace. And then you can do things like add palettes and so forth, customize things in that workspace, and it won't mess up your normal workspace. So my default workspace continues to have just a small set of palettes, but when I switch to the working workspace, you'll see I now have a ton of palettes, right? So that's because I added them previously. It's interesting, Marla, about the measures causing you a delay in continuing rhythm. I'm not, if you mean even just in regular metered music, that somehow seeing the bar lines causes a delay. I'm a little not sure what you mean by that, but feel free to explain in more detail. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and select that C, and now I will open the breaths and pauses palette, and I'm going to add one of these caesura markings. And it doesn't really matter which one I add because I'm going to make it invisible, but I'll go ahead and just add the one I add normally, which is just the plain caesura. And when I add it, I can then select it and make it invisible by pressing V. And now when I play, I forget if it's going to do it by default or not. Yeah, it doesn't do it by default. I then have to select that caesura and go over to Properties, and under Playback, I set it to 2, and it will happen the next time the playback is updated. The playback of pauses has always been a little funny in MuseScore, and sometimes they don't take effect until like the next update of the sound. You might have to do things like make another edit somewhere or save and reload the score before that pause gets honored, but it does eventually get honored. MuseScore 3 had some bugs in that were fixed, and in the process of fixing those, other bugs got introduced. So neither MuseScore 3 nor 4 handles pauses and caesuras correctly, but it's good enough. So some of the other things you can see here is I've got this highlighted text, right? This yellow highlighted text. Let's talk about that next. we're going to add some text and make it that type of color there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this, and I'm going to show you first how to do this manually, and then we'll talk about not doing it manually. So if I type Control-T and type highlighted text, there's some text that I want to have a yellow highlight on it. What I can do now is come over to where it says More in the Properties panel. It'll say More. If you're in MuseScore 3, this will be in the Inspector. But the same basic idea. You'll see a setting for frame. I'm going to set it to the rectangular frame. Now, I don't want to actually see the frame. I just want the frame so that I can fill it with yellow. So what I'm going to do is set the thickness of that border to 0 so that I don't actually see the border. But actually, before I do that, let me increase the margin a little bit. I want to make this a little bigger so that the highlight is a little larger. Now I'm going to come here and make that thickness 0 so that the frame won't actually appear. So 0. Come on. Really? Can't set it to 0? All right. Instead of setting that to 0, I think what I do instead is set the border to white. And now I don't see the border. All right. But now what I want to do is set the highlight color. So I'm going to go back to where it said More, and now or it's called the fill color here, and I'll select that kind of pale yellow there and select it. And now I got my highlight. You can also get the color of the text itself, and that is found if I go if I close this More section here and just go to the regular part of the Properties panel. Color is here where I can set that to be a deep red. So now I've got some deep red with yellow highlight, right? So that's the manual way of doing all that. However, there are other ways of doing that. So here is some text that says this is a description. I don't remember for sure, but I think my template sets this up for me, where if I come over to Properties and the text style, since this is staff text, the text style is what's called staff. But if I scroll down, you're going to see that I've got some custom styles here. They're usually called User 1, User 2, User 3, User 4. My template has created some custom styles, and one of them is called annotation. And when I click that guy, I'm going to get that same look. I chose a different color of yellow, obviously, but I chose red text with that yellow background. And so all I had to do to create that was add staff text, and then in the Properties panel, change its type to annotation. And that is because my template set up that annotation style. That's actually the one and only thing about this template that I use on a regular basis. Most of it is like, there's a few other style settings, a few other customizations that I made here that are frankly not worth anything. But the fact that I could create annotations that easily, just create some staff text and then change the staff tile to annotation, that's worth something, right? So let me show you how to create your own. Let's say that this is what I want to turn. In fact, let's just take this thing. I'm just going to enter another one. I'm going to enter new one. So here I'll type new annotation. And let's take this guy and let's take one of our unused user styles. So I'm going to go back to More and change the staff from staff style to say User 2. User 1 is something called heading I rarely use, but User 2 is, that one's also already set up to be annotation. So let me pick another one. Let me pick one that I haven't already set up, User 3. So this guy is now User 3 style. So this is what you would want to do if you want to create this yourself. You select one of the user styles you're not already using, then you're going to make those changes. You're going to go ahead and make that frame change, pick the border color, and maybe I'll make the border color yellow, and make the fill, and say select and make the fill color yellow. And now what I'm going to do is click the dot here and say save as default. And then click the fill. Same thing, save as default. And now that is the actual style setting for user 3. So now if I add other user 3 text, if I go here and type user 3, and I come over to where it says more, change from staff to user 3. Didn't I do that? Thought I did that. You know, I love it when I demonstrate things and they're not working the way I expect. All right, so I think what happened is, don't really know, to be honest. But we're going to find out. We're going to find out the other way of doing this. I'm going to go over to Format, Style, Text Styles. And now I'm going to take a look at that user 3 style and see, hey, look, it is set to yellow. So for some reason it wasn't applying, not sure why at the moment, but I'll worry about that in a minute. But I'm glad I came over here because this is also where I can change the name of that text style. So it's not called user 3 anymore, it's called new annotation. So the question is, why is that text, even though I changed it to new annotation, it somehow didn't pick up that style? And it's possible that maybe, you know, I don't really know. I don't know what's happening because obviously it worked when I changed the other one. So let's make some guesses here. I'm going to try hitting the reset button. I had to add the frame. That's what happened. I never set, that's the problem. I didn't hit the save as default for the frame. I set the color to be yellow, but I didn't actually tell it to save the, to actually create the frame as the default. So you need to do all three of those. You need to set the frame to be rectangular, you need to set the border color, and you need to set the fill color all as part of the style. So now if I type more text, oops, I did the chord symbol accidentally. Control T, more text. Now I can come over here, change from staff to new annotation, and it gets the look that I want. So that's how you do it. So at this point, I've showed you most of the things that happen in my handouts. So let me just take a quick tour of some of these handouts so we can see that that is in fact the case. You see I've got text with bullet points. I've got a rehearsal mark, which is just a quick way of getting text in a box. And I'll use that just to put a label on things. I try to be somewhat consistent when I do my handouts, both so there's a consistent look to it and to make it easier to update later. And again, so that if a blind user is going through this, they don't see the formatting, but if they hear it read, this is a rehearsal mark versus this is staff text, something might click that, oh, therefore there's different levels of importance to this information. So I typically use the rehearsal marks to label examples, and I'll use staff text to label individual things within the example. This whole example is incorrect spelling of major scale. This staff text here specifically is specifically for that note. Now, can you define shortcuts to assign a particular text style? No, you can't directly. It would be possible someone could define a plugin to do that. But since you brought it up, I'm going to show you the one other thing you can do. The other thing I can do is manually add a piece of text. I'll call it custom. And I'm going to do the same thing here. This time I'm not going to use the text style. It's important that you don't do this via text styles or it won't work the way you want it to. But I'm going to do the same thing about doing the frame, changing the border to yellow, changing the fill color to yellow, and maybe increasing the margin. I didn't do that last time, but I should have. So there's my custom text. I didn't do anything with style, right? So this is customized staff text. Now I can come over to my palettes, open up my text palette, for instance, and Control Shift drag that text element into the palette. Boom. And now there it is, custom. And now all I got to do is select a note, click that, and that is added to the score. So this idea that if you're going to have some customized formatting that you're going to want to reuse a lot, yeah, you can use text styles to get that. But if you want it even quicker, you can just Control-Shift-Drag anything from your score basically into a palette, and then you can add it that easily. So I actually have done that. If I go back to my working palette, so this score is still on the default palette, the default workspace, but if I switch over to the working workspace, you'll see that I've actually created a whole new annotations palette. Where did I put it? Don't I have it in here? Oh, I have it on my other system. My other system, I created an annotations palette, and I just copied all these things, these custom things into. I got a whole bunch of custom things. In fact, can I open it? Let's see if I can open it. I'm going to go, I'm going to click these dots, say load palette, and let's see if I have this thing. I think it would be under here. Annotations. There we go. Here's my annotations palette. So I had saved that palette previously on another system, and now I've loaded it into this system. And boom, it's already populated with all these really useful things that I previously set up. So I've got this annotations palette that you can see already has highlighted text and highlighted text and, you know, various different markings, different arrows and things that I dragged in from special characters and so forth. The glasses symbol, all these things are just letters that came in from special characters. So for instance, if I'm editing a piece of text like this and I press Shift F2, it opens the special characters dialog, and this is where there's all these special characters that I could then drag into my annotations palette. So under Unicode symbols, arrows, that's where these guys came from. I dragged them in from the Unicode section. Some of these I dragged in from the musical symbols section. You know, there's all these different special symbols that you can just drag into palettes. Let me answer Joanne's question here about do the palettes in alphabetical order. You can just drag them into whatever order you want. I don't typically recommend it because it's not very efficient. You can definitely do it. You can absolutely do it. But if you think about it, things like key signatures and time signatures and clefs, you typically deal with those things together. And yet they're nowhere near each other in the alphabet, right? So keeping things that are logically together, located together, makes some amount of sense. That said, how we actually organize them, like different people have different ideas about it, and no order is going to make sense to everyone. And that's why it's as easy to drag. Like if I want to put that annotation down here right below text, I can just drag it there. So I usually... like I have all my text, like these are all the text things. There's text, annotations, and fingering all kind of together there. Dynamics probably should be down there too, right? So I will occasionally rearrange my palettes to be logical. But the more of them you have, the more confusing it can get. So absolutely, we let you order them however you want, including rearranging them to be alphabetical if you think that's going to help. So that's the answer to that. So Allison has an interesting question about importing a PDF and getting MuseScore to play it. The thing is, PDF is just a picture, right? It's not music. There's no information about what it's supposed to sound like. You need basically an AI program to convert from the picture to the notation. Well, luckily those programs do exist, but it is AI technology and they exist, but So if in MuseScore you go to File, import PDF, it's going to send you over to MuseScore.com, where there is an AI program called Autoverus running. And you can use Autoverus here to import a PDF file. And when you do that, yeah, you can then load it into MuseScore and see what you get. You will, generally speaking, not be thrilled with the results. It's going to usually take more work to clean up than it would have to just enter the music yourself. But you can certainly give it a shot and see what you think. All right, let me get my chat back. So, but the idea of images is important because I am going to return to one of my other handouts here, this guy here. This is the PDF version of it, but I do have it loaded into MuseScore. Which one of these windows is it? This is it. So this is the one I said that basically has no music in it, or no music that you can see. But see here where it says click to play? What's happening here? How come I can click a note and you can hear music? I'm not complaining. I'm being facetious. I'm being whatever the word is I'm looking for. This is because I have done all sorts of fancy things here behind the scenes to make this work. So if I come over, if I make sure nothing's selected and I turn on invisible elements, you're going to see there's a staff here. I made my staff invisible. And I did that by right-clicking the staff and going to Staff Part Properties and saying Invisible Staff Lines. So there is a staff there. It's just invisible. This is a note. It looks like just an oval with a circle in it, but it's an actual note. And the reason it has the note name in the note head is because here under Properties, show more, you can... Oh, I think I must have done it to the whole staff. You can set the note head in the properties panel individually to show note heads, to show the note names, but you can also do this on a staff basis by right-clicking the staff, going to Staff Part Properties, and then Advanced Style Properties. And you'll see I have the note head scheme set to pitch names. So every note that I add here gets the pitch name within the note. So that is how I'm able to do things like have these notes here, the note names appear within the note head, but this thing here is just a picture. This is just a picture of a staff. You can see down here in the status bar, it's an image. So I created this in Google Drawings, and then I just copied and pasted it into MuseScore. It's that simple. Once you've got an image, let me select this thing and Control X to cut it, and then come over here, Control V to paste, and you'll see that I've just pasted that image. I'll need to turn off autoplace for it so I can position it the way I want. And then I position the thing to look reasonable, right? So, yeah, for creating things like handouts, but not just handouts, really anything where you've got some sort of complicated layout that you really can't do within MuseScore, some complicated image, some particular type of annotation you just can't do in MuseScore. Do it in your favorite drawing program and then just paste it in as an image. So, so that's that. Yeah, and so Joanne, I'm not sure what you're asking about. How can they be an octave apart? I'm not sure what you're asking about. If you're talking about my example here. So here's another really interesting thing. These notes here, look at the status bar here. This note here is actually A2. This note here is actually A3. This note here is actually A4. And that's because I've got invisible clefs here that I'm using. And then I'm also playing games with the offsets of these notes. So even though this here is A5 and is technically above the staff, I've pushed it onto the staff. So I'm using all, and I think I actually used a plugin for that. So there's all sorts of games that I'm playing here to allow me to have something that, again, when I go back to turning off all that invisible stuff turned off, it just looks like a thing to click, but it does this right thing, right? So there's all sorts of games that I'm playing in this handout that go kind of above and beyond. Ooh, my image is off. It goes there. There we go. So yeah, I'm playing all sorts of like unusual games here that go above and beyond the normal sorts of things that I might talk about. You could also do things like adding an invisible. Yeah, there's crazy other things you could do. But I think I've actually at this point covered most of the things. But yeah, let's just go back and take another look at this handout. We've got that yellow highlighted text. These here are just lyrics. This is just multiple verses of lyrics. Verse 1, verse 2, verse 3, so that I could add numbers and solfege and whatever you call these other names. So yeah, this is all just done using the techniques that I've talked about today. And I think I've showed you pretty much every technique that I use. Where's my, this is the one that had the horizontal frames within the system. And so I don't remember if I've showed you that. Well, I showed you adding a horizontal frame, but I didn't show you it in terms of adding it to within a system. So let's just do that. Let me select a measure here, plus frames, insert horizontal frame. And then I'll put a system, whatchamacallit break, section break at the end. And then I can make that gap bigger, as big as I want, to try to make the measures the size that I want. And this is how you can do things like have multiple examples on a single system like that. And again, I would do the thing of adding the caesura so that when you play it back, they don't just run straight together. So you'll see that there's really quite a lot you can do. And again, these are the techniques I use over and over and over and over in creating these handouts. There's some additional things you could do here and there, but just the techniques we've talked about today, that's basically it. That's basically what I do all the time. That's what I spend most of my time doing. If I look at the annotations palette, yeah, you'll see I use these arrows, and I'll show you why I use those arrows. It's so that I can say, when I'm editing this text, now just click one of those arrows, and it points down to the note. So that I use that if I want to really make clear that this text applies to that note, I will use one of those arrows to make that happen, right? So I use all sorts of little tricks like that to get things looking nice in my handouts. All right, so that's what I got for you today. So I'd like to thank everyone for being here. Thanks for the discussion. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for the comments. And yeah, this is now you have a little more insight into some of the things that are going on. Oh, thanks, Bob. I was going to leave a link to the template. The handouts are already in the course, so you can get those in the theory course. But I want to give you the template, so I will do that right when we're finished here. So tomorrow we'll be doing Music Masterclass as per usual. And I will be, we'll be picking up with the discussion of playing by ear. We'll do some exercises with playing by ear. And I'll show you a couple other things here and there that'll be useful. And I will give you heads up. Yeah, I would love to get some volunteers to come on to try some things and, for me to give feedback. So if you're not shy about getting feedback in public, I will encourage people to volunteer. And so last time I know there were people who said, oh, I would have, but I don't have my microphone or I don't have my camera. So now would be a time to think about making that happen if you want. So again, thanks everyone. And we'll be seeing you next time. Next week will be the Ask Me Anything session of the cafe because it'll be the first week of the month. So have some questions ready for me and I will see you all later.